Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the 200th episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. It's a bicentennial, I think you would call that. We've been at this for 10 years, give or take a couple months, and it is all because of you. I have you to thank and you to be grateful for. Thank you for making it happen. Thank you for supporting the show in whatever way you can, and thanks for the education to all the amazing guests we've had on the show and the amazing guests yet to be on the show. It has been a ball, it has been a joy, it has been a pleasure, and I'm excited to really put a lot more energy into it going forward. I've been wrapped up in this house build in the kind of last year and a half, and I always feel like these are kind of, we got to get another show out, and I haven't been able to put the energy I like to. I've got a whole huge folder of suggestions from those of you who have reached out over the months and years, and I promise to bring those shows to you. We have a lot of legends out there to interview, and a lot of hang gliders and hot air balloon people that I don't typically have on the show and should. It's been one of those I need to do for a long time, and I promise I will. But what I can say about this show, I'm kind of happy that it just happened to fall on the 200th, is this one is very special. One, is the first time we've ever had so many people in a single recording. I had 3 of the Expeditions 5 on this one. We've done live shows with more than that, but I had to get these guys in South Africa and London to come on the show, and that was all thanks to Barbs, Richard Barber. So thank you, sir. But this was a real treat to talk to a climbing legend, Andy DeClercq. And we didn't have Pierre Carter and Jeremy Holdcroft, who were 2 of the expedition members on this one. You'll probably recognize those names, but certainly Pierre Carter. He flew off Everest last year and has partook in the Red Bull X Alps back in the day, and a couple of those. And some great stories from that. And I will get him on just independently on the show as soon as we can make those 2 things align. But in this show, I talked to Scott Baker and Andy DeClercq and Richard Barber. Andy DeClercq, you all might recognize, those of you with a mountaineering background. Legendary climber. He's climbed with Alex Lowe and Conrad Anker and many others. Was on Everest and the fateful John Krakauer story, and has many hundreds of first ascents in his home of South Africa and many around the world. He's been at it a long time, but he's also a skydiver and a base jumper and a true pioneer in flight. He's been paragliding since it started and hang gliding before that, but it was just fantastic to have him on my screen and get to share in his joy of the mountains. These 5 guys went off to Pakistan this summer to try to break the altitude record. They have been inspired by all the amazing stuff that's gone on in Pakistan. Of course, Brad Sander was one of the first out there who I've done some flying with, and haven't seen him in an awfully long time, but he was one of the original pioneers. And then in the last few years, we've seen some amazing things by Antoine Girard and Damien Lacaze and Fabi Buell and Aaron Durgati's incredible huge triangles out there last summer, and then more recently Horacio Lorans and Tom de Dorlado, who have both been out there several times, but they made their incredible film of flying out to K2 along the Baltoro Glacier this last year, and that film is absolutely amazing. I'm sure many of you have seen it. If you haven't, make sure to do so. The link to that film will be in the show notes. But these guys are more humble, I think, in their flying endeavors, and certainly Andy is the behemoth when it comes to mountaineering and climbing experience. But they'd seen this stuff and thought, why can't a group of just blokes from South Africa and get out there and go big as well? So they did. They went out there, and soon after arrival, they did their acclimatization in the Hunza, and then made their way up to the launch point to get out to K2 and fly along the Baltoro. You hear all about that. But on the first flight of that series, things went epically sideways. And this is their story of what went right, what went wrong, which was quite a bit, and the learning and the education that came out of it. They are all, as you will hear, still very good friends, and they have plans for the future. But this was a lot of fun, and sometimes pretty riotous, and but a great education for all of us, especially when heading off to remote, big places like Pakistan. It's the highest mountains in the world. So enjoy this bicentennial episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem with all these fine gentlemen, and enjoy their story. Cheers. All right. Well, gentlemen, we've never interviewed this many people at one point, and you're spread all across the world, South Africa and Cape Town, and Barb's, you're in London, I guess. That's
well, I'm in Nottingham today, but yeah.
You're in Nottingham today. All right. And I'm over here in Sun Valley. So welcome to the Mayhem. It's cool to have you guys on the show. Barb's, I appreciate you keeping me updated both before and after. Why don't we start by just a very quick introduction from the three of you on who you are and your climbing and flying background, and then I'll ask you about the mission. But why don't we start, Barb's? Why don't you start, and then we'll go around my clock here, then we'll go to Andy, and then we'll go to Scott.
Okay, cool. So Richard Barber, I've been flying since 2004. Before that, I did my pilot's license in 2008. Within a year, I lied about my hours, went to South Africa, to the Northern Cape, to a place called De Aar, flew over 100 Ks quite quickly, went back the next year, flew 100K in a little over 2 hours, using half brakes most of the time and sort of scaring myself stupid. Gave up for a little while I was married, then got divorced, so I didn't have any responsibility, so took up the sport again. And then since then, it's just been a continuous rise, with paragliding taking over more of my life.
Nice. And Andy?
Oh, that's great. Cool. So in South Africa, I would be known as an Obali, which is an old man, an old guy. I started flying in 1984, actually, in the very early days. Prior to actual paragliders being made, we used to take the pilot chutes off our skydiving canopies and then run off hills. Started in the early days. Sort of up to about 1990 was sort of part of the early wave of flying in South Africa, and then I stopped and went off to pursue my alpinism and the sort of rock climbing. I actually lived in Seattle for 10 years. I've climbed all over the world: Denali, Patagonia, a few trips to the Himalayas before. And while this was going on, I was always busy with the second sport of skydiving, and then later base jumping. So I've kind of been around the block climbing, and then about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided I was going to get back into paragliding. I probably had about 300 hours up till 2017, and that's when I got back into it properly, and I'm really enjoying the aviation aspect. So in a way, with the rise of paragliding, I got off just when all the experimental stuff happened, and then joined again when it was nice and safe and well established. Married.
God, man, we got to do 3 podcasts just with you. But go ahead. There's a lot of history there. I would just die to dig into. But yeah, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. And then basically married with 4 kids in Cape Town, and run a cabinet making business. So that's me.
Do your kids fly?
My youngest son does. Yeah, he just started about a year ago.
Very cool.
The others don't like paragliding.
Probably better.
Probably better, yeah.
And Scott?
So I've been flying far less of a illustrious career, I suppose, in flying in aviation terms. been flying since 2019. I've come from a bit of an outdoor background. I did a lot of freestyle and whitewater kayaking was my thing for many years, kind of in my youth. A little bit of rally biking. So used to being, to a degree, out in the exposure thing, but not as wild as Andy's previous career. And also live in Cape Town. I work in the film and media production industry, and service, strangely, mostly fashion and luxury brand. But I organize things for a living. Is my and make good tea. That's my that's my life.
Mm. I always find it really interesting, the kayaking flying connection. And there seems to be a very much similar mindset in those groups of people. That was, certainly my background was in paddling before flying, and it seems to really connect. A different one is you, Andy. Will Gadd always told me that it made him nervous when climbers would go to flying, because it was, flying is very much a gravity sport. It's a flow sport, so he finds that kayaking, skateboarding, mountain biking, these kind of sports where you're dealing with a lot of gravity, you're dealing with gravity, obviously climbing, but climbing is more precision, slow. It's not so much a flow sport. You can get in the flow state of mind, of course, which we talk about a lot on the show, but it interesting that you actually, sounds like you went the other way. You started with flying and then you went to climbing. Is that right?
Not exactly. I've basically been climbing since I was a very young kid,
Mm,
and uh, the how shall I say, the combination of base jumping and climbing works very well together, and that was
mm.
something that I always wanted to do. So I started skydiving first, and then in the early days paragliding, but it was mostly to get into base jumping so we could climb things and then jump off them, and that's kind of what we did.
So you were the original Dean Potter. You probably gave him the idea.
Pretty much.
And your partners were no strangers to the alpine world. Alex Lowe and Conrad, and you're being quite humble. You've climbed a lot of big stuff.
Yeah, well, very interestingly, I met Conrad at the 7,000 foot Hilton Base Camp in Alaska on his very first season. He was a
Really?
youngster with a huge crop of blonde hair, and then, more sadly enough, we were in Paiute in 1999. We were trying Gasherbrum 4, and Alex Lowe was um, he was on an expedition to Shipton Spire, and he came out for a few days. I think he was sick or something, and that was sadly the last time I saw him, because
Mm,
later that year he was killed in that avalanche in Shishapangma. So
mm.
I've met a lot of interesting people. I've always kept under the radar and not sort of sprouted about it, but both the paragliders and the climbers are amazing tribe, really.
Speaking of the tribe of the two, you've pushed into two sports who take a lot of us. Mountaineering certainly has enormous risk. Usually not so much dependent on the people, but the mountains themselves. Same with flying. Often it's not the gear. It's sometimes the decisions, but we get in the problem with paddling and flying and climbing is you can get into places where you can't stop. You can't just hit the eject button. I guess unless you've got a base rig on your back and then you can. But which one? This is a hard question, but which one has taken more friends?
I would say, on balance, more people get taken paragliding
Mm,
um, than climbing, but I've just been climbing a lot longer, and so there's been a lot of people from climbing,
yeah.
more especially from alpinism, in the mountains, not so much rock climbing. But again, it's just got to do with numbers. There's a lot more people that basically paraglide, I think, and I think paragliding is a far more dangerous sport or activity than mountaineering and climbing. as you said, it's a lot more dynamic.
It
So
is very dynamic. Yeah, for sure.
it's a difficult question to answer, but on balance, I'd say paragliding.
Interesting. Hadn't planned on going there. Just it caught me as an interesting question. Barbs, you reached out before you guys went, and you and I you had said, "Hey, we got to get Pierre on the show," which I still need to do, and I was hoping he could join us for this. But those of you listening, that's Pierre Carter, who competed in the X Alps a couple times, and a legendary South African pilot and animal. And so, tell me, the original expedition, I assume, was a bit inspired by Tonda Dorlado and what those guys did in the Baltoro, or no? Was this something you had dreamed up and then they went in there and got into it? But tell us what was planned and the team, a little bit about the team and what the mission was.
Sure. So I'm never good when I'm bored. And COVID was rubbish, particularly to start with. I was furloughed for a little while, and that was June 2020. And so I started looking and I'd sort of started in May, even just looking for convergence lines and high cloud bases around the world. So I played on Windy, just looking for convergence, and then also looking at cloud base. And so the two which I found were the convergence that sets up over the Atlas, and also then I found sort of the Karakoram from that. I was also already aware of the Karakoram because of John Sylvester. Like you, I went with Sky Safaris, Jim, Eddie Colfox, who I think at some point you just got to get on the main.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And obviously John Sylvester as well. And then and I'd watched Birdmen of the Karakoram, and so I had a sort of bit of it. And having seen this thing for Pakistan, I then contacted Andy. It was like, hey, Andy, I've seen the Karakoram, and I also watched a program with a David Attenborough program at the same time, just happenstance, where it talked about Concordia. And Concordia, you've got the view of Broad Peak, you've got K2, you've got the Gasherbrum, and you've got Masherbrum to the south. And he called it, I think, the Valley of the Gods. And I was like, okay, got to do this. So got in touch with Andy. I was like, hey, Andy. And he chuckled and sent me his goals in paragliding. And his ultimate goal in paragliding was to fly the Baltoro. So that was 2020. And then 21, I sort of started really sort of looking at it a bit more. Then 2022, 21, I started planning for 2022, but couldn't get it organized. And actually, thank goodness, because I'd have got nowhere because I didn't have the right contacts. I didn't realize quite how difficult trying to organize the logistics of something in Pakistan would be. So that was where it all came from, I guess.
Can you give us a couple minutes on what is involved? I just had 4 buddies take off and go there to fly, and I don't know that they did anything. I think they're just going out there and seeing what happens. I don't think they have necessarily a mission. They just want to be in the Karakoram and fly, and they know that there's oxygen. That's kind of
it. Oxygen is a hard one. Oxygen. That was my portfolio. Make sure we have oxygen.
Okay. All right.
I offloaded that particular one to Scott. Yeah, I offloaded that pretty fast. When Scott joined the trip, I was like, Scott, I'd been in touch with Brad Sander, and I was like, Scott, you can look after oxygen. So that was that problem. But no, I think, first of all, you've got to get permits. Now, you've had Aaron on the show in the past who talked about ending up in jail in Hunza because he hadn't sort of got that bit sorted out in advance. Now, all these things can be sorted out with time. If you've got the time, it's not a problem. You can speak to the right people. When you get there, the Pakistani people are the most friendly, helpful people anywhere on earth. as far as I'm concerned. I've been to a lot of places, but they really were outstandingly, brilliantly helpful and wonderful. But you've got for the Baltoro specifically, it's a militarized zone. The only helicopters that can fly there are military helicopters. So you've got to get a bunch of different permits. You've got to get a trekking permit first of all from the government. But actually, do you get a trekking permit or do you get a trekking and mountaineering permit? And if you don't have that, you can't go in there. If you don't have an expedition partner that's a local partner, you can't go in there. And then on top of that, you then need to have a permit to go flying. Now, fortunately, Tom and Horatio, and Tom, we spoke to through XCMAG. They put me in touch with Tom, and Tom, he was moving from Belgium to the Azores. And he's like, okay, I'm going to have an hour on this day at this time. I can talk to you guys.
Yeah, he's a busy man.
But he gave that full hour and gave us total undivided attention. What he didn't tell us was that he was moving house from Belgium to the Azores. He was editing the Flying Between Giants movie, which anyone who hasn't seen is an absolute must for anyone who
paraglides. Amazing.
The cinematography is excellent. He and Horatio just awesome. When Morales got caught up at base camp and seeing his face sort of having walked for 2 days back, it's the whole thing's priceless.
Yeah.
So there was just and Tom put us in touch with Jasmine Tours, which, to be honest, was probably the most important thing out of everything, because they've been established for over 20 years. They know everyone. They know the commissioners. They know sort of everyone that's needed. They know the military people. They even have a deal with the military for the helicopters, so that any other group that goes there, they have to put down a £10,000 deposit or $10,000 deposit of people's own money beforehand so if they're going to get a helicopter. Now we didn't have to do any of that because Jasmine's so well established, and Jasmine does all the checks to make sure that we had the appropriate insurances and stuff, and that the military wasn't going to be sort of left short if they did things. So that was super important. But I also WhatsApped Antoine Girard because I found his number somewhere and had a WhatsApp conversation with him. I found out that a guy called Sajid Shah was the head of the Pakistani Paragliding Association. Got in touch with him, and he said to me, look, if you want to go to the Baltoro Glacier, you need to have what's your mission going to be? And so it's like, okay, we need a mission. Oh, well, I guess we're going to go for the record then. And so that's how it went from just wanting to go and fly in the Baltoro and fly around amongst the Trango Towers and fly to Broad Peak to actually, let's see if we can break a record.
Okay, so the mission was to just break the record, go higher than anybody else had gone.
The record was to fly onto K2 ideally, and to break the altitude record. And so all the preparation really, certainly from my side, was to make sure I was in the best possible condition to enable me to do that safely.
And how was the team chosen? And we've got a couple people missing here, so fill in quickly. Who's the team? How was that chosen? What were the different roles?
Sure. So Andy and I had been talking about this for a couple of years, and one of the things I've been doing was looking at weather. I've always been a bit of a weather geek because I don't have that much leave, so I'm forever, and I've got access to staff travel. So I bounce for day trips to the Alps are not desperately unusual for me, because if it's good, then I'd very happily spend twice as much on a plane ticket than I would on a train in the UK. And so Andy and I were absolutely down for it. And at the same time, Pierre Carter and sort of, I guess, his sidekick, a chap called Jeremy Holcroft, up in Joburg, he flew off Everest last year. He was the first person to do it legally. They were also looking at Pakistan and what could they do. And so we had a call between us, and I'd never met Pierre at this stage. And it was like, look, do we think we can muddle along, and that we're going to keep each other safe? And it seemed like this could work, and it was sort of going to be Andy and I as buddies, and then Pierre and Jeremy as buddies. And then in the autumn, I was in South Africa, and I got to know Scott a bit. And then at Christmas, spent more time with Scott, and Scott was like, "I'd really like to come on this." And it's like, you got the experience. So slightly unsure. And then we had more chats, and then Scott proved incredibly useful when, sadly, a pilot in South Africa crashed. He didn't end up making it, but Scott did a hell of a lot in terms of trying to do logistics to give him the best possible chance. And then we had another discussion, like, look, we think Scott could be good. And Andy sort of broached that with Pierre and Jeremy, and they said, he's welcome. And
I got in under the guise of organizing things for a living, is what I do. So I can organize. Yeah, I can organize.
things. You need that. Yeah. You need that person on a team.
I can fix. I can fix. That's my gig.
You're a fixer.
I'm a fixer. Yeah, I'm a fixer.
So I threw oxygen at Scott. Then everyone else decided they would go to Hunza for 2 weeks before going to the Baltore. I just simply couldn't do that with work, so I got an altitude tent instead. So every morning the daily stand-up would start with, "So what altitude were you sleeping at last night? Did you get any sleep?" My very first night, I may not have read the instructions quite as well as I should have done. And I woke up after 2 hours sort of going, holy, I don't feel very well. So I sort of opened the tent and just was there. And I discovered that I'd gone straight to 6,000 meters.
Perfect.
So while
acclimatize in an evening.
So while Bob's was sitting in an altitude tent in London, Andy, myself, Pierre, and Jeremy went to Hunza for 12 days. Was our major acclimatization time. Was 12 days prior in Hunza. Andy and we coined the house thermal Andy's thermal, because from pretty much the first day, Andy would launch, go straight into the thermal, and be close on 6,000 meters sort of 20 minutes later, all in one climb.
Whoa.
How
high is Hunza?
So, I mean, Hunza...
3,000 meters, yeah.
3,000 meters.
So, yeah.
Okay, wow.
Take off 3,000 meters. Andy, what was the floor? The floor was... the bottom of the designated landing was about 2,200, I think. And the mountains up the back of Hunza, who topped out there the most? Was it Jeremy? But well over 6,000.
About 6,500. So
6,500.
You just take a house thermal to 6,500. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Andy's, we named it Andy's Thermal, and it was the day's mission was to try and chase Andy in his first thermal of the day, up to the top.
Some quick math there. That's 12,000 feet over the valley floor. No, more, 13,000, 14,000 feet over the valley floor. That's a spectacular.
It's quite neat. Something. Yeah, it's quite something.
Amazing. So on these kind of altitude, getting adjusted flights, were you pushing into the big terrain? Were you kind of, okay, let's go for some little XC, or were you guys literally just, taking what you could and getting some altitude and getting some time under your belts?
Well, I'll answer that. We, the flying in Hunza is really good. We did, in all those acclimatizing and training flights, pretty much every day we did triangles. So anything from a 60K triangle to a 100K triangle. We found that when we got there, there was a lot of snow from the winter, which hadn't cleared off earlier. And actually, Antoine,
when did you get there?
In the beginning of June.
Beginning of June, okay.
The beginning of June, and And so we found on the snowy side of things, on the Rakaposhi side, there was a lot of downdraft katabatic winds. So we pretty much stayed on the other side, which would be the southeast side, and we found that we could still get pretty decent climbs there. So it was basically 12 days of just really nice cross country flying, big triangles. And just testing out all the warm gear and the oxygen and all that sort of stuff.
What would be involved in going from that, 60, 100K triangles to the mission? What needed to happen for those like me who haven't looked very closely at maps of this area in a while? What needed to happen on the day that you're going to try to do it?
You mean on the record-breaking day?
Yeah. What would be involved in making that? Obviously good weather, but what does that route look like? How long is it? How much time would it take?
Well, I mean, flying from in the Baltoro, flying from where you take off in Paio to up to K2 isn't very far. It's about 50 Ks.
Oh, okay.
So it's 50 Ks there, 50 Ks back. But it's in that entire flight, there's nowhere to land. It's as Tom said, the Baltoro Glacier, you got to think of it as lava. I mean, you could land there, but you'll crash and you will get injured badly. So it's highly committing. Basically, you're flying over this river of ice with boulders and rocks and lakes and all sorts of things. So the transition from Hunza to the Baltoro, the flying is very similar. I mean, it's you find a nice sort of rocky sunny face, and there'll be a climb there, and you just bounce from thermal to thermal and peak to peak and so on and so on. But the difference between Hunza and the Baltoro is the level of commitment.
Okay.
I mean, in Hunza, there's fields to land on anyway. You're just one glide away from a landing. In the Baltoro, there's nowhere to land.
Yeah. Okay.
Big
Barbs,
difference.
you look like you want to talk. You keep putting your hand up.
Yeah,
there.
no, it was just I think so. Obviously, Hunza is about 130 kilometers away from the Baltoro Glacier.
Okay.
So the those guys spent 2 weeks in Hunza. Then they spent a day in a sort of in the back of Land Rovers, sort of being driven from Hunza to Skardu, which is sort of the staging post, if you like, the city that's closest to the Baltoro.
Okay.
And then you have a day's drive up to a place called Ascoli. And on that journey, depending when you go, depends on how sketchy that drive is. On the way up, it was still early enough that there wasn't that much water coming down. But by the time I came out in a vehicle, there were a few landslides that had been down. There was so much water coming down the fordable rivers that they were no longer fordable. So you had sort of one Land Rover and then another Land Rover. You'd walk over a dodgy little couple of pieces of wood to get across this raging torrent, over the top of the raging torrent, and then you get into a different Land Rover, and then go down the next bit, across another one, and then down the next bit. And so what a company like Jasmine Tours does is they organise to have these cars which are doing shuttles between unfordable rivers.
Wow.
And then once you've got to Ascoli, you then have a 2-day walk into to get to Payu. You can do it in a day, but even if you can do it in a day, your kit and everything else isn't going to do it in a day, because that's with the porters, and there's only so far when they can walk when they're carrying all this kit at 2,800 meters. It's 25 degrees in the valley, absolutely scorching. It's amazing how strong the sun is.
And these guys are carrying 50 kilograms. They're carrying 50 kilograms per person. So they'll carry two glider bags, for example, quite comfortably when they walk in. I think the logistics smoothed over by someone like Jasmine Tours is quite substantial. It's quite rough logistics. But I think, Gavin, your actual question was towards what were the weather conditions like, as in when would you call?
No, not yet. Let's get to that. No, I'm trying to understand the logistics. So you can't start at Hunza and do this mission. You've got to do these overland things to get into a better zone. You can't fly from Hunza and fly to Skuli, for example, or Paiu. What was the other one? The Paiu, and you can't do it by air.
Yes and no. I mean, it's all driven. It's all driven.
Okay.
So you fly from. So Andy and my logistics were we flew into Islamabad. We flew from Islamabad to Gilgit, which is a commercial flight, beautiful through the mountains. And then from Gilgit, you take, what was it, a 2-hour car drive to Hunza. Then we were based in Hunza. The logistics in Hunza are amazingly easy. It's a little town. You can get oxygen at the local welding shop. And it all takes a little bit longer than you would expect or than you might hope, but it's all manageable and it all happens. We stayed in a really nice hotel called the Hard Rock Hotel, which is a 20-minute walk from launch, which was absolutely amazing as well. 20-minute walk up to launch. They've got a nice set of 5 flags outside. You can see all the wind direction. Absolutely perfect. And then flying in Hunza, as Andy was saying, is relatively easy. You've got plenty of places to land, and there's plenty of big flying there. We then drove with Pierre and Jeremy up the Karakoram Highway, which is spectacular in itself. And that we did in a minivan, perfectly comfortable, lots of rock falls along the way. And then we got through to Skardu. And Skardu's that town that's like the base of operations for all of the mountaineering and all of the big treks of people going into the Baltoro K2 and all of the peaks you were talking about earlier. And then it's a day's Jeep drive on the scariest road I've ever been on. It's carved into the side of scree slopes. Like the ground that the road is on is the same as the ground that's rolling down the mountain. It's but they're amazing. And Bob's and I were with a driver that must have been in his 60s, maybe mid to late 60s, maybe the early 70s, and the guy drove the hell out of his Toyota Land Cruiser, like old school Land Cruiser. Didn't feel overly safe in the beginning, but then realized actually how good he was. And then you get to, as Bob said, Escoli, and that's a camp in a village. That's a camp in a village. Okay. And then you walk from there. And that's where, so you are, the last part of it you can't fly to. Bob's flew into Skardu, so he didn't do the whole roundabout trip. He had 1 day's Jeep drive in. And then we all started. So we all did the Jeep drive in together and the walk into the Baltoro.
And from there, what are you looking at to get to launch? What's required for the day? Now I'm asking the weather question.
So, the weather, we worked out that I've been a fan of Soaring Meteo for years because it's super simple, really easy to see what's what. And actually, I found a really quite good interpretation of how Soaring Meteo, sort of what that was saying and what that meant for the conditions in the Baltoro. Basically, if there was any sort of big lines of cloud, then it was going to be overdeveloped in hell. And if it was saying little clouds and the cloud base was saying 5.5, you could basically add somewhere between 500 meters to 1,000 meters to whatever it was saying for within the Baltoro. So that was quite helpful. So on any given day when we were going to fly, we'd walk up from base camp at Paiu, which is at 3,300, and it's the last camp before the glacier itself starts. Walk up to 4,000 meters. We use porters to carry our bags up because, well, why wouldn't you? At €9, and I slightly messed up with kit, so I ended up having to have a very heavy kit. So I had an Impress 4 and so I was carrying 28. Well, my kit total was 28 kilos, but the porter would carry the kit, and then I'd carry the warm kit and the oxygen and that stuff up in a little day pack. So you get up to launch for about around 11, by which time it would be starting to come up the hill. In the valley, the Kaspatic would be still blowing, but not hard. But that's sort of almost helped with an easterly, because it'd be coming down the glacier, which is running sort of east-west. So it'd be coming down the glacier, and then actually the flying itself is pretty simple. It's at 4,000 meters and it's hot. There isn't a lot of air, so takeoff is fast, and it's scree and it's steep. It's if you mess up a takeoff there, it's gonna hurt a lot. You're probably going to be okay, but being a scree slope, you'll sort of bounce and slide, and you're going to bounce and slide a long way. You're going to smart for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, once you take off, then there was a thermal to the left, a thermal to the right, and you kind of just pretty much, certainly while we were there, we just sort of pinged up pretty fast after that, and then you sort of kind of.
Is a lot of the forecasting, you said Soaring Meteor worked pretty well, but is a lot of the forecasting just, licking your finger and sticking it out in the weather, or they're pretty reliable models?
So Soaring Meteor model worked really, really well. The big problem is once you go into the Baltoro, there is no mobile reception at all. Even the satellite reception at Peiyu Base Camp is almost non-existent. Wow. You have to it takes 15-20 minutes for an in-reach message to get out a lot of the time, because it's got to wait for a satellite to be in just the right place, because it's got a bloody great steep mountain behind you. So that meant that although I had absolutely learned how to interpret the weather, I was then having to ask sort of people on via the in-reach, going, "Hey, can you give me the weather forecast for tomorrow? This is what I'm interested in," and I get these different messages back, and then it was a case of trying to imagine what Soaring Meteor was actually saying from that to then work out what the weather was going to be. And that was a sort of so a learning point was you need to really have a fully briefed person who absolutely understands what it is you want from a weather forecast. And the other problem was the people providing the weather forecast did not want to say, "It looks great," if there's any risk at all, because they don't want to feel responsible if you then crash and smash yourself up on the Baltoro. Once you take off, as Andy says, you go up the Baltoro, there are no landing options. You have to make it back.
So you've got to make 50K, you got to make 100K, 50K out, 50K back, and you got to make it. There's nowhere you're not slope landing in the scree. You're not landing on the glacier. That's just game over. You got to make it.
Pretty much, and certainly that should be the attitude of anyone flying there.
Yeah.
Is that Tom described it as lava, and that for me was a really good description, because it just said, you don't land on lava, and that was certainly the mindset that I went there with. Not that I really got to fly very far up the glacier just because of circumstances, but for me, that was something I never wanted to get into a risk of.
Yeah, I mean,
and I certainly know that Andy felt the same about that.
And Andy, you've got obviously the most glacier experience, I'm sure, of anyone here, but there were a couple of glacier crossings I had to undertake in Alaska when I did the thing up there with Dave Turner. And luckily, after the first one, I flew over the rest, because walking across this thing was just mind-bendingly difficult and incredibly dangerous. But it was just they present things that you can't see from the air, and it's just a maze. I don't know how the Baltoro is, but I imagine if it's similar, that was not something I ever wanted to repeat.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, basically glacier travel is time consuming, shall we say. And as you
yes.
Said,
it's just the worst maze problem ever.
Exactly. It's much easier to fly over them. The Baltoro doesn't have snow on it until much higher up on the Gasherbrum side, and just underneath K2. It's basically just ice and gravel and pebble and rocks and
Rivers.
yeah, sort of rivulets. So it looks brown. It doesn't look white, but it's nasty. It's convoluted, jumbled, and not somewhere that you could land safely.
Mm.
Last year, Ramos did land in the middle of Broad Peak Base Camp. He sunk out there. And also something to consider. I mean, the Baltoro starts at 3,300 and goes up to 5,200. And I mean, just for the air density, you're flying much, much faster. So you can't just sink it into a little tight spot anymore. You need a proper runway because you're going to come in fast and hard.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that does catch a lot of people out, places like Peru and that kind of thing. Your speeds are. I remember John Sylvester always talking about that he really liked flying a much lower end glider in the really big terrain just because of the speeds. You don't want the Enzo speed anymore. You want something that you can manage when you're trying to stick it in.
Yeah, for sure. That's why all of us on our trip, we all had sea gliders. We thought about it. Basically, Barb's and Jeremy had the new Photon. I had an Alpina, and then Scott had a Nivek. Pierre had another Xenon, but it was an older one. That's a D, but it was 4 years old. So we sort of thought it flew about the same as a C class.
Yeah, pretty similar machines. So when you get, quote unquote, the day, it looks pretty good. I'm imagining, I've been told that flying in Pakistan is in a lot of ways pretty straightforward. It's kind of like beer. There's not a lot of wind. I mean, obviously you've got to deal with the catabatics. You've got to deal with things. It's big terrain, but on good days, it's pretty straightforward. But I would imagine there's a little pucker factor here doing this thing, flying over all this terrain that's unlandable. Or is it that straightforward? Is it the kind of thing you launch, you get in this thermal, and okay, this is going to work. This is straightforward. We can do this.
So I'm gonna, as the most junior of the pilots, I will say there's definitely a pucker factor. From my point of view, I suppose from everyone, you got to wrap your head around it. It's why Hunza was quite important, because it is such big terrain. I've flown prior to this a couple of times in the Alps, but not flown any really big mountains. And then suddenly when you're looking at, as we discussed earlier, when you're sitting at like Andy got to 6,500 in Hunza, and you're looking down at the floor at 2,000. It's over 4 kilometers in that distance. So definitely a case of buck up and huck it, as well as obviously all the planning and the right conditions to boot. But one of the big warnings that about flying in the area that Antoine actually said to us was, it's one thing when you have overdevelopment, when you have a slightly lower cloud base, so 5,000 to 7,000, and you start having overdevelopment. But he really warned, and he's flown a lot in the area. He strongly warned. He was like, when you have cloud base between 7,000 and 8,000, and you have overdevelopment at that height, he said it happens much quicker. So much quicker than anything lower. The overdevelopment happens much quicker. So one of his big warnings was, if you start to see it overdeveloping or developing between 7,000 and 8,000, then you need to go home.
Yeah. Aaron talked about that too. He had those huge triangles there last year, but talked about if there was any sign of overdevelopment, it's game over. Your exits start shrinking really fast because you're high. It takes some time to get on the ground. And I would imagine, with this flight out to K2, out to Baltoro, if you're high enough, are there places to run? Can you get over into another valley? Are there escape routes, or you're trapped? This is the mission. You got to get in, you got to get out. You got to make it work.
So with the Baltoro, it being this one valley that goes basically east-west, and then you go, as you head east, you get to a place called, looking at Tom's tracks, and to an extent, Tom and Horatio have done all the hard work, and Antoine as well, in terms of highlighting. You can even see on some of the apps, you can see where the thermals are, and they are beautifully predictable. But then you have to hop over to K2. But before that, literally, you can just run back down the Baltoro to the end of it, which is at the end of it is Peiyu Camp. So as long as you're in the main valley, you can get there. In theory, the only problem is that Mashabram is still over 7,000 meters. You've got even Peiyu, which no one really bothers climbing. That's 6,400 meters, and behind that is Choricho, which is 6,500 meters. You've got the Trango Towers next door, which are the Trango Towers. It's just the scale of the mountains that are everywhere. So if it's ODing in one place, the chances are it's ODing everywhere. So hence
so you just don't play with that.
OD, you're just getting home.
Yeah.
But of course, you're going fast. I mean, our trim speed was on the hottest day. I think it was actually on the first day. We were sort of turning around. It's like, okay, wind's got to be that way because I'm doing 49 k's an hour at trim. And then you turn around and you're doing 49 k's back the other way. It's like, okay, this is going to be a fast landing. And then you try pressing the speed bar, and you can do over 70 in both directions. Just and because you've got the height to play with when you're going out, you can, and it's quite novel.
I mean, so in a perfect world, you're out 50K, you're out at the end, and you're tall, assuming you've picked a good day and you're trying to break the record. You're tall, you turn around and you're a glide from being back. You don't have to work very hard. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Okay. So what happened? Are we at that point yet? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, I think probably are. Probably beyond it, to be honest. So let's throw this.
Andy, I think, starts
to Andy. I think, I think Andy should start on this, and then because really it's his story combined with a bit of what I normally describe as fuckwittery. I'm not sure whether that can make it onto the.
Totally. Yeah, totally. We're X-rated. Let's go for it.
All right. So after being in Hunza, we made our way to the Baltoro, and we had a really nice checkout flight the first day. Then the next day we went up, and we had allowed ourselves 2 weeks in the Baltoro. So on the second day, we started the 700-meter walk up, which was quite steep, and I had a very tight neck, and I thought, it's just a respiratory infection that we would get. And actually, Pierre had one of those as well, because Peiyu is not a very clean place. There's donkeys and porters and all these mountaineering expeditions come through, so it's incredibly dusty and dirty. So then anyway, we walked up. Chest pain started getting worse and worse, and so I thought, let me just put some oxygen on. Then the chest pain's lowered, and I mean, the wind's perfect. I've got this chest pain. I didn't think that I thought it was going to go away. We all took off, and about an hour later, over the Trango Towers, it got really bad. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say about 8. And I realized,
in terms of pain?
In terms of pain, and I realized, oh shit, I'm having a heart attack in midair above the Trango Towers. Fuck. Which is not a nice place to have a heart attack.
No.
So,
I mean, the heart's pumping.
I'm gonna back it up there a little bit and just say, give I suppose add a bit of the humorous side to that. Andy is saying that. I mean, he's saying that he was at pain level 8 on the radio comms. He's like calm as a cucumber. He's so from as Andy climbed it up and obviously started to have the chest pains. he flew out at about 5.5, I think, Andy. You flew out about 5,500 meters. He flew out from the gaggle. We were in a nice gaggle flying. Andy flew out, and I think I radioed him and was like, "Hey, Andy, where you going?" Because we were all kind of flying together, and he was like, "No, I'm not feeling so good. I'm just going to put on my oxygen." So he flew out of the kind of more busy air and put on his oxygen. He came back and joined us, and we flew for a bit longer. And I think that was when we were in Trango Towers, and Andy flew out again. And as you heard him say, he was at Pain 8, and I said to him again, "Hey, Andy, where you going? Like, all okay?" I'd seen him knocking his chest while walking up, which was when he was. So it didn't really register at the time, but and he'd said that he'd not been feeling great. That's why he went to put the oxygen on. So I said, "Hey, Andy, everything okay?" And he was like, "Yeah, guys, I'm not feeling so good. I'm going to head back to camp. I'm going to go land. But don't worry about me. You guys just stay and do your thing. Enjoy your flight." And off he started.
But this wasn't the flight you were going to try this on. This is just a checkout flight. You guys are just goofing around in the air, having fun, or you kind of playing with it. Oh, maybe we got the day.
Well, what we were doing, we were basically just exploring all the thermals on the way up the Baltoro. The day was pretty stable, beautiful blue sky and everything, but I mean the top of the climbs would have been about 6,500, no more than that. That's the forecast we had. So it wasn't a day to get very high above 8,000 meters. I think you need slightly different weather conditions. You need a heat low, or you need a little more instability, or you need a little more wind. You need different factors from that day.
So Andy, you're experiencing this, pretty severe chest pain. Is this something you had experienced on previous climbing expeditions? Or was this something totally new? Were any red flags going off other than heart attack? Were you thinking pace? Were you thinking something along those lines, or were you pretty clear what was going on?
Well, I didn't. I've never had any medical problems like that before, ever. And my family's got no history of heart attacks or anything, but there was just this incredibly tight chest. I didn't think of it as a heart attack at the time. I thought, I've just got massive angina, which is very tight chest. And as I said, I've in all my prior mountaineering, I acclimatized easily, and never had any problems. So this came as a bolt out of the blue. And funnily enough, it was one of those things. Afterwards, you can see, okay, prime risk factor, basically middle-aged man, not acclimatized, up high. There's not enough oxygen getting to the heart. I mean, it's clear as daylight. And we can talk about, the mitigating factors that we could have taken beyond that. But the point was, here I found myself at 5,500 meters, and it was a mortal feeling. It's like, this is not right, guys. I can die from this. So all I wanted to do was get down on the ground. So that's what happened. Is a long 30-minute glide from 6,000 meters down to 3,300. And it's one of those instinctual things. I need to get down onto the ground. I need to sort out the chest pain. So I landed okay. Bob's also landed next to me okay. And then because we were buddy flying, the five of us would basically fly together and not, from a safety point of view. When I said I'm going to turn around, Bob's and Scott both joined me. So that, after an hour and a half, that sort of cut short their flight. But this, as I said, it was a mortal feeling. I needed to get down. So we all landed. Scott, unfortunately, had I guess the word would be
slightly harder landing than
landing fixation.
Slightly harder landing than I needed to, but yeah, I mean, we were chatting. So in that half an hour where Andy kind of left Trango, and I think we left there just under 6,000 in the ends and the long glide home. We Bob's and I, obviously there's all this time, so there's all this. There was half an hour glide, or yeah, close on half an hour glide. Obviously checked in on Andy a couple of times. Again, the radio comms is on some of our camera footage. Andy always like, Andy, just checking in on you, and he'd be like, yeah, chest pains, still there. I'm just gonna go. I want to land quickly. He was like quite very calm and collected. We all, I suppose, knew that it was quite serious because no one would have landed before, and I was watching to see where Andy, and it was my saying to myself is the classic airline saying, where it's put your own mask on first. Like when the oxygen mask come down, put your own mask on first, and then help.
Yeah,
There's
don't make
always
the
a kid next
situation
to
worse.
yeah. And I was watching Andy because I was like, I wasn't totally sure how he was going to land or where he was going to land or if he was still up for landing. But I fixated on watching Andy and made the cardinal error of not putting my mask on first. And I landed a little bit quicker than what I had, than what I should have. But I rolled my leg over a boulder. My actual injury is not that bad. It's just a broken fibula, and I tore the ligaments off. But what made it worse is the fact that I landed the other side. Andy landed 200 meters from camp. I landed 100 meters from Andy, but I landed the other side of the river. So it earned me a 4-hour walk home on a broken ankle, which I took some. We had some. Our med kit was really well organized, and we all had little flying med kits as well. I had some tramadol in there, which is like OxyContin, which from when I did rally biking stuff. Also, you make sure you carry a bunch of really hardcore painkillers just to get you through the first part. So I ate 2 of those, and they make you a little bit funny. So I did like a video interview with myself where I did a splint on my leg. Andy sorted out all the med kits for us. We had an expedition doctor put a list together. Andy did all the ordering. So we had like a nice leg splint. I bandaged myself, and I took my 4-hour walk home. All the time chatting to the guys. Again, Andy in such tough nut spirit that we had a little negotiation with the porters as to what they were going to charge us to come and pick me up. And Andy, in the middle of his scenario, was still, holding it together enough to organize to send them my way. And by then, Bob's had landed. He took a bit of a tumble on landing as well. And then Bob's, I mean, you kind of took over the. You rolled with things from there, and that's, I suppose, where the crux of this is.
I was the last to land by about. We actually all landed within 45 seconds of each other. Scott landed first. It was all on video. Then Andy landed about 15, 20 seconds later, but in the perfect spot. And actually, it was the best landing of the 3 of us. The day before, we had agreed that one of the things I'm always keen on is that everyone focuses on spot landings. So we'd agreed that he who lands the furthest from the windsock would have to pump the water. Because and that's a way of just sort of getting everyone to be focused on something that matters. So Pierre,
so you're trying to nicely say that Scott really messed this up.
Well, and Bob's is not shy of random.
I would put it differently to that, but I'll come to that in a second. And Scott may want to come back at me. So Pierre and Jeremy had put the windsock up, and I'd said, look, closest to the windsock is the key thing. What they didn't tell me was they put it on the edge of a boulder field. So
It was a
I'm
spot
trying to get
landing, Bobs.
I'm
It was
trying to
meant to
get
be a
as
spot
close to
landing. You
the
weren't meant to land in the boulder field. It was to
no,
land.
no. I was landing with it. I landed
You
within 20 feet.
misinterpreted it. You misinterpreted.
I landed within 20 feet of
It's
it.
a good thing
Anyway,
you guys are all a long ways apart in South Africa.
yeah. No,
I can see
going on.
the punches are coming out.
Yeah. So anyway, I did my little roly-poly down the, which is on video with my 360 camera underneath me because I had it dangling down. So that gets a nice picture of me doing a roly-poly. And anyway, I then sort of was like, okay, yeah, I'm all good. And I'd asked Scott if he was okay, and initially said he was fine. Then he's like, I twisted my ankle quite badly, and then sort of later on, so I went over and looked at Andy. Andy was like, yeah, no, I'm not feeling great. I'm just going to chill for a bit. Can you help me pack up my kit? So I help him pack up his kit, pack up my kit. I give him my oxygen, give him my water. Then I run up to camp to go and get the big med kit, which was meant to have some the special heart attack spray stuff, the thing you put under your tongue, but couldn't find that. But got back down to Andy. We got him to some shade, and Scott comes on the radio and say, "Guys, I'm kind of cooking out here, in the heat." And
I'm starting to burn. I'm starting to burn, and the pain's starting to set in.
And I was like, and I give a shit, not at all.
Bobs, you were very sweet at the time.
You've landed in the
Mr. Barber. You were very sweet at the time. You don't
I really wasn't. You should have heard me to Andy. I was furious. And even Andy was like, what was he thinking landing on the wrong side of the river? It's like, don't ask me. So anyway, a couple of immediate lessons were, when I went up to camp, I didn't actually know exactly where the medikit was. And okay, there are only 5 tents and to go through, and it was in Scott's tent, but actually it was at the back underneath 2 other bags, and it's a big medikit, so I found it, but it wasn't a case of just going and grabbing the medkit. And that was a really stupid mistake to start with.
Let's stop there for 1 second. You gave me a list yesterday, what you guys did right and what you did wrong. Can you pull that out? You got it in front of you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Can you just take us through that? Because it's fantastic. And, if certain things need elaboration, go for it. They all seem pretty self-explanatory, but I think in terms of the takeaways here, because I want to ask more about Andy's injury and Andy, how you felt and all those kind of things. But this is a good segue. I think it's a great chance for you all to review this as well, but also the listeners, because it's, again, we always learn everything too late. We learn it afterwards, but hopefully this can help all of us listening to learn from your mistakes. And in a sense, it wasn't a tragedy, but it was, things went wrong. And of course we learned from that. So take us through that. First, what did you do right?
Yeah. So I think one of the things we did right was we spoke to everyone. I reaching out to Antoine, Tom Dodorolo, Jake Holland, other people who've flown there as well. Logistics wise, speaking to the head of the Pakistani Paragliding Association Advance, Jasmine Tours, Brad Sander, who was super helpful as well. I also spent a bit of time talking to Fabian Blanco, just about the mental side, and what did he see as the biggest potential gotchas for us. And he particularly talked about the exposure aspect, and that you may not be able to get the same exposure, but make sure you have some exposure. Put yourself in situations which are uncomfortable, because you don't want the first uncomfortable situation you have to be over the Baltoro at 6,000 something meters and things going a bit wrong, and you having no capacity to deal with that because you've never had to deal with it before.
Good advice.
Then the next one we did right was, from a medical perspective, I reached out to Matt Wilkes, and he nearly joined us, but work meant that he couldn't. But he put together a comprehensive list of what we should have. And Andy's wife's actually a former expedition doctor as well, and she sort of helped too. So we covered there the logistics, the flying, the mental side of things. We also made sure that we all had appropriate, adequate insurance. We all had global rescue. We all had good travel insurance. We all had paid the Garmin bid as well. We all knew that we all had that. That was something that was super important. We all did a lot of prep, although it was quite different in terms of what we did. And then equipment-wise, we had an Excel spreadsheet running on Google Docs, so everyone could compare. We could see what everyone had. I think we made pretty good choices on wings and reserves. One thing I would recommend, though, is check your reserve's going to fit into your harness before you buy the really expensive, really large reserve, because you're not going to be able to sell it back again. So that was a bit of an error. I think I was very lucky. I managed to get some sponsorship from Virgin for my wing. There were a few connections to in terms of Richard Branson went to the same school as me. He did all sorts of aviation stuff, which is pretty crazy. And I managed to get it to someone reasonably high up there, and they just loved the idea, and they were like, "Yeah, we'd love to support this." And for them, I wasn't asking for the trip to be sponsored. It was something that I was doing anyway. So they were happy to, and I'm hoping to go back next year. Acclimatization wise, and this also goes to the exposure thing. The other guys went to Hunza. I did a whole bunch of SIV on my own, which doing SIV with someone on the radio is very different from just going out and pulling stalls on your own. Also, then mountain flying, and with Scott and with Andy flying in the Northern Cape, sort of putting it yourself somewhere where if things go wrong, it's going to be consequential very quickly. Then I would say the buddy flying, we did it, and even when Andy said, "You don't need to bother. We're within gliding distance of landing," we actually still stood by the buddy flying rules, and I think that ultimately was very important. We then, with the InReaches, InReach comms are not that easy if you don't get it set up properly in advance, and that getting that right and having the right message in the admin section, so including your health insurance details, your travel insurance details, your credit card details, that we're paraglider pilots. If we've crashed, it's serious. We're going to need immediate help. And we survived. We're all alive. We're all still friends. And that's not always a given. So those, I think, are the things that I would say we did right. I don't know if anyone has anything they want to add to that.
I think we did sorry, I'm going to be a little bit more esoteric and say the first thing we did right was to dream big enough to go and do this, because that's also it's I mean, Bob's is going to go through a very well put together list of things that we could have done better, or that we did wrong, but putting the effort into doing something like this, everybody seems to think that Pakistan is this really far off place that is dangerous and hard to get to. Like, these things are a possibility with the right things in place, with the right suppliers. I mean, we've mentioned Jasmine Tours a number of times, but also because they were so good with the organization on the front end, but when things went wrong, they were very good with things on the back end as well. These things are like, these trips are more possible than what people think. So one thing, so back to big thing we did right is all actually put the time aside and have like actually have a crack at it.
We've only got this one time on this rock. We might as well go for it. Might as well have a crack at things. But yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, so what did you what things that you could have improved?
Yeah, so to an extent, I've already touched on it. We had numerous protocols in place, like buddy flying and stuff. But in reality, we should have had more. And there are elements where we should have had more robust agreements in advance. and it's something I discussed with Matt Wilkes yesterday as well, just to get his take, because he's been an expedition doctor on a lot of expeditions, and he flies, and he was just, I thought he'd be a useful person to bounce things off in advance. And overall, his view is we did well. When things went wrong, we did a pretty decent job between us in terms of getting everyone got out alive. And but things we didn't do, which we should have done, we didn't all have medicals. In some ways, I'm probably, aside from Jeremy, probably I'm younger than Andy and Pierre, and probably fit.
No, you're middle-aged, Bobs. You're middle-aged, my friend.
I'm still middle-aged, but I do a lot. But we didn't have an agreed fitness standard that we needed to be at, and we didn't have medicals done, all of us, and we really should have done.
By medicals, you mean going to have a cardiac test and that kind of thing, like this kind of stuff you do for the exiles? Okay.
So when I did an expedition adventure race a few years ago, we all had to go and do a VO2 max test, sort of, where they did the whole the ECG, and they had proper cardiologists to actually do the analysis of that to make sure that there wasn't anything funky that was going on with your heart. Because that's obviously, if you're doing anything like that's kind of an important thing. So that was something which was really a big miss. But it's still possible that had we done that, Andy's one might not have been picked up.
Yeah, sure.
If he had really pushed it hard on the treadmill, it probably would have been, particularly if a cardiologist had done the review and they'd been able to look at the ischemia, according, that's what Matt said, then it would probably have been picked up. But if that hadn't been done, if it had just been a go for a medical, you're fit and healthy, he would have come out clean.
Yeah, and from what I know, I mean, Matt would know a lot more than this. I'm sure you guys talked about it, but from what I know about altitude is it's a really fickle beast as well. I mean, like you said, Andy's had all this experience at altitude and spent so much time, never had any trouble. I've had friends that have gotten really hypoxic at 13 grand, where you wouldn't even have usually turned on your oxygen, just a little bit too much coffee the night before, not very good sleep, maybe a beer too many. There's a lot of things that can affect our physiology on the day. The next day could have been totally fine at 8. From what I understand, it's just things are true. Really,
blood gets thicker.
Yeah,
because you've got extra hemoglobin.
Yeah.
You've got extra red blood cells, so your blood becomes naturally more stodgy. And so hydration, you need to stay extra hydrated to keep your blood thin enough. And one of the things that Andy did really well was he stuffed 8 aspirin down his neck. When he found the aspirin in the thing, didn't have the spray, but we had aspirin, and he nailed 8 aspirin, and that was pretty damn important to saving his life. But then we probably we did all have we had the right equipment, the terrain, but everyone should have equipment, terrain, and exposure experience. And I think you can't necessarily get the terrain, but the exposure can always be done in a different way. And then acclimatization, I acclimatized in a tent. I'd done my reading on it, and I was comfortable that I was happy that was a valid, proper acclimatization that I'd have done. But I never actually checked in with Andy and with Scott and Pierre and Jeremy as, are you guys happy with me doing that as an acclimatization? And actually, that's something that, the checking in with each other and making sure that everyone is happy with each of the protocols in advance is super important, because it can take a small thing that can really derail an expedition. And that brings us on to the first aid kit. We didn't actually know what was and was not in it. We had an original list, and then it was pared down to make to make it more manageable in terms of just there's only so much stuff you can take. But it probably was a mistake not to just have one person absolutely in charge of the medical side of things. Talking to Matt last night, had he been the expedition doctor for us, he would have insisted that we all had medicals in advance. That's something he just would have done. But he wasn't. He was providing ad hoc advice, which was super helpful, but actually probably not the best. Not what he would have done if he was engaged in a more professional capacity, if that makes sense.
If you do this again, sounds like you're planning on doing this next year, would you have an expedition doctor on scene?
I'm going with Matt.
No, I know you are, but I'm saying
he's the expedition doctor.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm saying, just in the future, let's say you didn't have access to Matt, would that be somebody you would pay for? Would that just be, is that a mandatory, or is that,
No,
okay.
Not for me. I think if you've done the right things in advance and you've agreed all the protocols in advance and you have an evacuation plan organized and in effect, you've done a lot of the stuff that an expedition doctor would do, and a lot of this is just an awful lot of this is just admin and protocols and making sure that you've done the work in advance. And that's, we did quite a lot of it. We just didn't do all of it. And the point is, it's just making sure that you've done enough. And I don't think, in a lot of instances, would an expedition doctor make a difference? Well, if you've got the right pills there, that's going to help. Should you have a defib in that sort of situation? Well, in reality, defib's going to help for a little bit, but it might help. But is the defib going to be with you?
Yeah, gotcha. When we take our woofer training and paramedic training and, even first aid, simple CPR at the YMCA, it's always scenario based, right? They don't talk about it and then you're done and you go to the next thing. You talk about it and then you do it and you have a victim and you go through it. It seems to me the thing I hear over and over and over again in incidents like the ones that you guys had are things like the InReach setup. You can't buy the InReach and get the plan and assume it's all going to work. You've got to go through it. You've got to make sure that you've got the check marks in your social thing. So everybody that knows where you are can also message you, and you've got to have the contact set up and you've got to have it paired with your phone. And they're brilliant, amazing devices that are, we had these cat phones for the X-Alps 2 weeks ago that, have satellite technology. So in theory, you don't need the InReach, but in the reality, they didn't work like that. The InReach is still the de facto device that we all need to have, but you've also got to know how to use them. And, these are little things that can get swept under the rug when you've got a big expedition, because there's so many things, that have to go, that, your groups when you're flying, just a way to contact somebody. If Andy, if it hadn't gone as well as it did, and, who to contact, who are, you got to have a list, like you said. And so it sounds like you guys did a lot of that right, but it's just, there's always these little things that are, what I'm getting at is, it's nice to play through, okay, what if? Let's actually go through the what if and get to the end, and what's in the medical kit? Let's open it up, and what if somebody has a heart attack? Do we know how to deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things, the first time Andy actually said heart attack was in his message to Garmin when he had pressed the SOS button. At which point, because after he landed, I said, look, do we need to press the SOS? He said, no, I don't think so. And I was like, okay, I'm going to outsource this. I'm going to ask my brother, who's a doctor, and I'm going to ask Matt Wills. Now, the fact that I had those as potential contacts meant that I kind of took that responsibility away from myself to an extent, which was something that makes me very glad that Andy's okay, because I know enough in terms of having done enough different first aid kit courses, stuff. I should have known, and I should have just been like, no, we're pressing the bloody button. The fact that I was like, I'm not sure about this, I want to check with a doctor, is really me saying, no, I want to press the button, but because I respect you and you're a bit of a legend, I'm going to. But he didn't ever tell me my pain level in the air was 8. I thought I was going to die. Those things came out, but they didn't come out till the next day. And so the other part is being really
we all
honest.
have egos.
It being really honest about what's happened. Scott, initially is that I think I've sprained my ankle, and he's like, yeah, I'm in a lot of pain. But actually, realistically, he was never walking out of that. There was no way he was going to be able to walk out of that. And Andy was never going to be walking out of that. We should have pressed those buttons straight away. And I think we didn't have any protocols of who makes that decision, what are the circumstances, what needs to be true. And had we done that, it may have meant that he got to hospital a day earlier. It might not have done, but it could have done. And that could, in a different scenario, have made the difference between life and death. And, it was a pretty uncomfortable night.
That's Tom Dorlado's saying that I rely on all the time. If there is doubt, there is no doubt. And especially, I think, and I'm just adding, you guys did an amazing job, but especially everybody's got global rescue. Why the hell not? Press the damn button.
Absolutely. And that night is not a night I'll ever forget. Waking up every hour. Hey, Andy, you still with us? Yes.
We took shifts.
TF.
We took shifts every hour. One of us would shout across to Andy or go knock on his tent. Andy, you okay over there? Yeah, I'm fine.
So, Andy, let's switch to you here for a second. Rich, we'll come back to the list because there's a lot more learning there. But I'm just wondering what's your frame of mind as this is going on? How are you feeling? How scared were you? Are you feeling like you're going to pull through, or are you really kind of questionable? I mean, obviously you've got the face that you're showing to your friends and you're being brave, but how are you actually feeling?
Okay, so I've just landed. The heart's thumping away, chest pains, and everything like that. I'm very good at centering and staying calm, and that's what I needed to do. So I basically put my hat on, and I told Bob I'm just going to calm down, and I lay there in the blazing sun and just tried to relax myself because I thought that's what it would take, and it did. The chest pains and the and the breathlessness and everything came in waves, and it stopped and it started and stopped and started. Because everything's internal, I was still trying to control it. I still didn't believe it was a heart attack at the time. I mean, it was dawning on me, but I never felt like I was going to drop dead with a catastrophic heart failure. So I was just trying to calm down, slow the breathing, slow the heart rate down. What actually helped was not the oxygen; it was taking all the aspirin. That is the platelets. And then, subsequent to all of this, I found out that the type of heart attack I had was called a end-stemic, which is it's still life-threatening, but it's not catastrophic. So it's a blockage of one of the arterial veins, so not enough blood and oxygen is getting into your heart, but it doesn't cause muscular damage of the heart. So while I'm lying there, I'm thinking, I can do this. It's going to be okay. Looking at the faces of my family and, just trying to get myself calmed down. So I knew at the time that, this was a serious medical emergency and I needed to get out of the sun up to the tent with a cup of hot tea inside me and then to discuss when to push the SOS button. So as it turned out, we could have pushed it an hour earlier, but as it turned out, it wasn't a major issue delaying that hour. I think if I was unconscious or with greater and more severe symptoms, Bob's would definitely have come to the aid and called for rescue immediately, but I think it worked out okay. Anyway, so then once you press that SAS button, you can't unpress it. It's like, shit happens around the world. And it's the second time I've been rescued. The first time was when I broke my knee base jumping in a remote place, landing. And it's quite humbling, actually, knowing that it's now out of your control. You can't get, there's no way I could have walked out for 2 days in 35-degree heat with an unstable heart. So it was really humbling to be able to, basically let go and let Global Rescue, let my friends come and help me. And that's exactly what happened. So the next day I was chopped out in a military helicopter. It was actually quite cool talking to the Pakistani pilot. To a military hospital in Skardu, where they stabilized me, put me on blood thinning drugs, and made it so that I was out of danger, with ECGs and echo scans and things. And they enabled it such that I'd be able to travel back to South Africa, which happened a few days later. And I went to see a cardiologist here in Cape Town, and the next day they put a stent in one of the veins in my heart. And it's a pretty common thing for middle-aged men, and the prognosis is looking good. In about 2 weeks' time, I'm going to do a stress test on a treadmill, and they're going to put the electrodes on and see, and then I'll be able to see what I can do after that. But pretty much the outcome was great. I'm still around. We're all still friends. There was a lot that we could have done better, which Bob's is going through, but I see it as a very successful expedition, actually. Funnily enough, after my heart attack and the whole helioback, there were 2 more days of flying, and then it started raining. So I actually didn't blow the rest of their holiday too badly.
Yeah, nice, awesome. And Andy, prognosis sounds pretty good. What does your future expeditioning look like? Is it less? Is it the same? Can you go back? Would you want to go back? I imagine the mountains are still calling just as strongly as they always have in a lifetime full of alpine.
Yeah, I would definitely like to go back. I would plan things differently and make the camping in Paiu a lot more comfortable. It's really dusty and really dirty. And if you've got a nice, comfortable base, then it's quite nice to do that. I would do things differently, definitely with the physical, and I would acclimatize better, and that would entail spending a lot longer. And acclimatizing a lot more slowly, like in a mountaineering sense. That's what Antoine and Jake and Vesso were doing in Hunza. They were in Hunza for a month when we were there, and now they're in the Baltoro right now, also for another month. I think that for a person my age, I think you need to be a lot more focused and a lot more clued up on your acclimatization. We thought we could just wing it with oxygen, but it didn't really work. The heart attack was caused by not really being acclimatized. There weren't that many contributing factors. Smoking was one of them. I used to smoke a lot, and but ultimately it was the altitude. So acclimatization becomes very important.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Barbs, back to your list. Let's take us through that.
Yeah, I'll try and run through it a bit quicker. So one of the other things we didn't do was really agree what is not acceptable. And that was a bit of a mistake. So, for example, on the first day, I actually, because I hadn't been there, I wanted to test out my setup, and I wanted to make sure I didn't suffer from altitude. So I had my oxygen on full blast from the start. So we had these 2 massive cylinders. But it looked like it was running low. It actually turned out it wasn't really running that low. It was just that the angle that it was in my jacket meant that it looked like it was running low. But we went back, and Jeremy and Pierre carried on. And they said they got pretty close to landing on the Baltoro. They got super low, which sort of wasn't something I was desperately sort of happy about. when they told us that, because that for me was with what we'd said, with what we knew about it, and the fact that landing there should be almost in itself just be perceived as a major incident. But we never actually had that conversation in advance. What would our views be if
really
someone landed
clear directives? And
it's up to it was kind of everything was kind of still up to each other, even though obviously it would potentially have a massive impact on the whole expedition. And to the same extent, there was how far away, if we're buddy flying, how far is too far? When I've buddy flown in South Africa with Andy, I'm sure it's the same in Sun Valley. You stay super close because it is amazing how quickly you can lose someone. And you stay on the radio. And again, we didn't have those agreed. It wasn't really a problem, but we probably should have had, look, we kind of stay in the same thermal. If we're going, we say we're going. The other person, it's agreed that they're coming with, or if they're not happy, then they say they're not happy. We didn't have that done. So that was
how much had you
ideal.
guys, the five of you, how much had you flown together before this trip?
Never. I'd flown with Andy a lot. I'd flown with Scott quite a lot. But I hadn't really flown with the other two had flown a lot together. So sort of there was that. They kind of knew how they flew together.
But then so four of us had all flown in Hunza for 12 days together. So that's again, that's one of those things as well. It would be good to spend that little bit more time together before you push for the big one.
You guys are all still friends. I don't want to throw a question that would put a knife in that, but what I thought about, the first thing I thought about, Richard, when you told me about the expedition and the number, the first red flag for me was that's too many people. Did you find too many, too little? Just for me, managing more than one other person gets really tricky. The odds of an accident, of something going wrong, like you said, the medical kit, what if the one person that knows the medical kit, what if he's the one that has it's just, there's difficulty in numbers. Did that present itself as a problem during this? It doesn't seem like it, but I'm just wondering.
Not particularly. I think the fact that to an extent we were sort of almost two buddy pairs, plus then Scott was sort of attached to Andy and I in a way, was my perception.
So it was kind of two pairs. It was the three of you and the two of them. Yeah,
it was kind of two pairs with Scott sort of there as well. Was my take. I don't know if you would agree with that, guys. But
I think
thing.
Just to Gavin's point, actually to the contrary, I think the five of us as five people everybody had valid input. Everybody had a piece to play in the organization and the prep. Equipmentless and all of that. That was very much from my perspective, easier as a group of five.
Okay.
I think the flying thing, I mean, we agreed that we'd always split into two or to three, and we agreed, and we'd always split into two pairs, and then the third could choose, depending on the circumstance, who they spun off with.
Okay, so it worked, and you guys kind of had a protocol, and
I don't think the numbers thing. I think the numbers thing was part of our success to this whole thing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So then one of the things, and spoke to Matt about this last night, was smoking. I gave up alcohol for 6 months before going, and for me, foregoing alcohol for a day is quite a thing. I don't really like foregoing alcohol. I love it. So when Andy and Scott were smoking, I was not happy. So that was an issue. That for me was just something that I wasn't very happy with. But we hadn't agreed in advance, and because we hadn't agreed in advance, I couldn't say no, don't smoke. But that was something I felt we should have done.
Okay.
Then the next one, obviously, don't become a casualty, and then be realistic about about your injuries and symptoms. That's super important. And actually, one of the weird ones is speak to Garmin and Global Rescue in advance. Garmin started calling loved ones before they actually started getting onto Global Rescue. I have no idea why they were doing that. And they did this when I rescued a mate from Nepal last year. They spoke to the casualties' family before they went to the insurance company. And I'm like, why would you do that? Just get on with getting the evacuation. The last thing, people don't need to know the person. By the way, your husband's having a heart attack. He's stuck in the middle of nowhere. What they want to hear is your husband's being evacuated. It would be far more useful. So,
wait, this is Garmin did this?
Yeah.
Holy crap! I got to talk to them. I was just talking to Garmin this morning. I will let them know.
I would love you to talk.
That's not how you triage. That's crazy.
It's nuts. And and then there was a whole process that went through, and then it gets to Global Rescue and what have you. And it just certainly that was what we understood happened, and it certainly seems to have been what happened on the 2 incidents I've been involved in.
Yeah.
Wow. And interesting.
So Garmin phoned and Andy. Andy's button got pushed. Garmin phoned Andy's wife. She wasn't in signal. They then phoned second down the line Andy's son, who gave them my wife's number. They phoned my wife, and all they could say was somebody's had a heart attack. So they didn't actually. So all they did was create a little bit of panic amongst everyone.
Okay, now I'm thinking about this. Okay, so we put in who to contact in an emergency, and so that's obviously what they're doing. So their protocol is to, if you press the SOS, you have the 2 emergency numbers, your primary, your secondary. That must just be their protocol to do that automatically. That's interesting.
Not the one which is in your notes saying, cool, here's my insurance details, here's the insurance number.
Oh boy, that'd be a big thing to straighten out, because there's, that's how they have it set up. But this is an interesting, God, that is their protocol though. That's an interesting thing to.
And this I actually said to Bob's yesterday. I said, it may be that that's their protocol because they need the next of kin, the listed person, they need to talk to somebody that can make decisions. And that would normally be your second listed person.
This is a fascinating subject,
would be my interpretation of why they always phone the next of kin.
Yes.
They do the same in a medical, in other medical things. If you go cold on the operating theater, the first thing they do is they phone the next of kin, and they open discussions with them. But as Bob's is saying, it would be preferable that they phone the insurance people first and get on the rescue side before they get on the alerting everyone.
So I think there's 2 really good things here for all of us and for the listeners. The first thing, and that's how, Richard, that's how you and I connected first. But the first thing we should think about as a community is who are the 2 people we want on there? For example, right now I've got my wife as the primary. After hearing this story, that's the last person I want to know, be told if something severe happens to me. I want my buddy Nate Scales, who's a paramedic, who's a pilot. He knows everything about me. He knows my risk tolerance, and he knows how to get into action. And he was part of the whole Kiwi incident here. You want people like that to know that something has happened and can put it into, when I threw my reserve here before the last X-Alps, that was the person I contacted. So maybe we as a community need to think about, okay, who do we put on as the primary and secondary? Secondly, I will call Garmin and give them this feedback, but I don't think that's going to change. I think that that's probably their, higher up protocol. That's probably a legal thing or something, but it is interesting. I mean, the first thing they should do obviously is, and I think they do is it goes, the call, Garmin doesn't do the rescue. It's the IERCC. It goes to them, they take over. So it's probably for them. It's just protocol. They're just following the ABC.
Yeah. So one of the other things from that was actually, having we would have been better off just calling messaging Jasmine Tours, who would have contacted the military immediately, and they'd have sent a helicopter.
Yeah.
Now that actually would have been far more effective than anything else.
So
Now,
this is a good one. I want to stall on this. Rescues. We had an incident here in Sun Valley a few years back where a buddy went in hard, broke his leg, and there were 15 of us in the sky that day, and all but a couple knew that it was going on, and we landed and we organized our own rescue. I mean, that was what the article on the website is built on, was this incident that goes into the insurance and the whole thing. Because if we had just hit the SOS, relied on standard authorities to save this guy, it was the same thing with Kiwi. Our community is way more resourced. The paragliding community, the flying community in general is way more resourced than outsourcing it. We've got the skills. We've all been there. We have the contacts. We can do it much, much, much faster within our own community. So that is something to, depending on where you are, most of the time it's hit the SOS. If there's doubt, there is no doubt. But depending on where you are, you may very well be able to organize and handle the rescue, and especially if there's a search involved, way faster through your own community. So that's, good point.
Yeah, so interconnected with that is, after a couple of stories, I've got my in the notes I have my credit card number. So if in doubt, get a helicopter. I'll deal with it later. Here's my credit card. But the problem with that is that they don't seem to really read those notes. That seems to be the last thing that happens. And I also now have connected to that I have a Bitly link, which goes to a Google spreadsheet of useful contacts, which just my way of trying to make sure that can happen.
That's interesting.
It's just, but it only works if it gets the right person. And in South Africa, I know of people who've pressed the InReach and it's not worked because they've contacted the wrong people. And because in different regions it's different people, and do Garmin or the IREC or whoever it is, does it get to the right person? So now when I go there, I have the local numbers. It's like, right, here are the helicopter numbers, but actually, should I be putting those in my emergency contact? I don't know. And that's if you can help the community with that, that would be something that would be epically useful, and it would make this thing feel like we've done the right thing.
Your point is that actually that first person of contact, especially for a trip like this, might be a trusted friend who's already had a basic brief of, if you get this call, please will you execute these instructions accordingly, or deal with the mayhem that ensues.
I like both these things. I mean, one, Richard, the more information you could put out there to someone potentially helping that's not in your community, the better. The Bitly link, the credit card number, all those kind of things. I had never even thought of that. So that's fantastic information that we can definitely put in the SOS notes. When Kiwi disappeared in Nevada, they looked at his SOS notes. When I got it was Global Rescue. When I got them on the phone, they'd seen all that stuff. So that was useful. The other thing, to your point, Scott, I'm just thinking about this. In my personal case, I've got Maddie, my wife, as the first one. She wouldn't know how to do anything, but she would call my buddy Nate. So I think what I need to do is, first thing she'd think of is, I got to call Nate. He would know how to deal with this. So I think
my wife did the same thing. She phoned my mate Aiden, who was abseiling down the front face of Table Mountain at the time.
Of course.
He was,
that's the risk, because our buddies are out doing something cool.
Well, he looked at the phone and he was like, Sonia doesn't normally call me. There must be a problem. And he answered the phone. And dealt with it from there.
I guess it's just important. It's important for us to know that as a community. Okay, hey, Garmin's going to call first and then second. They're going to call your primary and secondary. Who do you want that to be? That may not be your wife. It may be, but it may be somebody who's used to dealing with these kind of incidents on a regular basis.
Might it be the insurance company? That would be my question to them. Should we put our insurance company in there, or should we put Global Rescue actually in there?
Yeah, maybe Global Rescue, but then you want to have the your policy number and all those that's a really good question, because in my experience, it really depends on who you get on the other line. Now, the protocol, the very, very important thing, which I'm sure you guys learned from an insurance perspective, from a reimbursing perspective, is when an incident happens. I've got a 1-pager now that we're going to distribute to everybody here shortly because of these kind of things. And it needs to be more on triaging, but the 1-pager is basically, buddy goes down, something has happened. The insurance needs to know as soon as possible. They need to be notified as soon as possible. Whether this should be the primary or secondary, I have to think about that more. I don't know. That's a really good question. I'd never thought about that. It's a really good question, but for sure, I think that's more of a from your group, the spreadsheet that you created that has all the information of everybody, basically it starts to get very risky if you start taking helicopter flights and having things happen in the hospital after that, and that all has happened before you've contacted the insurance company. The earlier they are aware of what's going on, the better it is for you to be reimbursed. That's what it comes down to with insurance.
Yeah. But I just wonder whether, if you've got the policy document, because you have all that detail in the admin section, but if that means it's the first people they contact.
It's a good question. I just don't know. I don't know if you want them involved in that kind of a thing because it's insurance. I'm always a little wary of that, but it's a great question that I need to get a better answer to.
Cool. And I think really that's, we've got, it's also just having that key information in there, which is just the fall from the fall from height. We're paraglider pilots. Let them know that it's going to be paraglider pilots fall from height, just so we've got that.
Yeah, that's what I have in my notes. I'm a paraglider pilot. The chance of a spinal injury are high. Just so they know that. I think that's important. Well, guys, great stuff. I'm glad everybody's still friends, and although it looks like fists are going to be thrown across the pond there maybe a little bit in the future, but I'm glad you all made it back, and a great end to a pretty scary situation. Andy, I'm glad to hear you're still going to be chasing it in the mountains. The world deserves that, and you're all stellar. I look forward to talking to Pierre and Jeremy, but especially Pierre about his X-Alps campaigns and some other stuff. So thanks for reaching out in terms of suggestions for that. But Scott, heal up quick. It looks like you're way more hurt than Andy. So y'all can see the little scooter that Scott's riding around on and his wrist. And so better landings to you, my friend, and in the future. But thanks for sharing your story and for all these terrific lessons, and thanks for sharing your time, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Andy. And I'm going out to fly with them in November, December. So we are still friends. I'm sure I might get a dead arm from Scott, but that's fine.
Fantastic.
Bob's always deserves a bit of a beating.
Thanks very much, Gavin. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription. And it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.